So, I'm Ray Fisk, and this is a talk on elevating service research, reimagining humanity with the Earth service system. And this is the second time I've submitted something that I did all by myself. Only once before have I ever submitted a presentation to Frontier, so this is the second time. I got obsessed with this idea and wrote it very quickly before the deadline and submitted it and was shocked to get it accepted. I was shocked the previous time too, because I knew for sure that the conference didn't need me if I was already in other abstracts to have my own separate one, but I'm delighted I got to do this presentation with you. So here are my topics. We've got three things to share with you. The idea of elevating our perspective in service research is a key part of elevating service research. The idea of elevating our language too. And third, the idea of elevating our wisdom. And there are many other things that I think might be part of such an idea of elevating service research, so I'm not trying to claim that this is all we need. I'm simply trying to say that these would be some good first steps. So, let me get to it. First off, the elevating our perspective, the idea that we should be trying to think bigger. The early service research that I participated in back when I got into the service research field in 1980 was primarily looking at business service systems, even though we didn't typically call them service systems. We typically called them just services. And we didn't do much research back then on nonprofits or governments. It was primarily research on businesses. By this century, we've evolved into a very service systems focus in a much broader lens. But I think we can elevate it further by looking at, as I'm going to be presenting today, looking at Earth as a service system. So that's my key idea, that we can think of it that way. So the inspiration for this talk is from this slide. I've used this slide for the past 2 years when talking about CervCollab, in which I've argued, as this slide says, CervCollab believes service researchers are uniquely positioned to help accelerate human progress. And the reason I think we're uniquely positioned is because we see service systems. In other words, we see the human things, the activities on planet Earth. We know that all of those things are service systems. And the people in many other areas don't know that to be true. They don't know about our research in service systems and service research in general. So seeing it is not enough. And part of the reason I decided after 2 years I needed to submit this abstract was because I think we need to reframe it. It's not enough to look at it as we see service systems. I think we need to reframe it as an Earth service system. So here's the introduction to my talk. I'm developing a logic for reimagining humanity within the Earth service system. And here's a quote from a recent article that I participated in, 12 of us, Dave Bowen leading the talk, or leading the article rather. The last line of the article was, service interactions are essential for human progress, so there will always be new opportunities for new service research and new service interactions. Now that same sentence could have been written in 1980, could have been written in 1990, and it could be written in 2030, 2040. That's part of the reason I'm still around, even though I retired from academia, is because there's always fun, new stuff that needs to be researched. Here's a slide from my childhood, a picture from my childhood. I was 14 in 1968. Actually, the photo, I was already 15 by the time I did that photo. This is from December 1968. The first selfie of Earth, humans taking a picture of our only planet, our living planet. It's the only place we know that life exists. There may be others somewhere, but we haven't found it yet, so this is all we know. This is the only planet. And it's a great photo in the sense there's the barren moon, and there is the blue marble, as it's often been called out there in space. And it was often called Spaceship Earth. Buckminster Fuller was the guy who coined that phrase before this photo even exists. And in many ways, it's an excellent metaphor for the context of what I'm talking about today. That we're all on Spaceship Earth. All of the resources that humans need are in the ship, on the ship, say it any way you want. We're all spinning around the sun, the same speed, etc. So that photo launched something known as the overview effect. Ever since that photo, humanity's been able to see photos of the Earth, and those photos help shift human consciousness, especially for environmentalists. There was an Earth Day that was started 2 years later. I got to participate in the debates about climate issues in that Earth Day. It definitely increased the environmental interest. And by astronauts, the overview effect is specifically describing astronauts, and you can see my statement there about it. The overview effect describes the transformative cognitive and emotional shifts reported by the astronauts who viewed Earth from space. Now imagine being one of those astronauts in that capsule, taking that photo in '68. The year 1968 was an awful year on planet Earth. Vietnam War, civil rights, assassinations, problems all over the world. And of course, it could have been taken this year. It'd still be a mess, wouldn't it? Not much progress from '68 to now in terms of what's happening on the planet. But the astronauts see it differently. They see it like that photo. They see it from a broader perspective. So to me, it fits with what I'm trying to say about the Earth service system. Here's one of the key guys that was pushing for that photo, Stuart Brand. He was famous for having said, "Where's the photo?" You can see it on his little button there. We haven't seen a photograph of the whole Earth yet. And he was the publisher of the whole Earth catalog. You know why he wanted the photo, so he could put it on the cover. Stuart Brand's still alive. He's a fascinating character if you don't know about him, but I won't try to say more. So here's more about the Earth service system concept then. Life evolved to serve life on Earth, which I refer to as the Earth service system. And so my phrase encapsulates the essence of life's interconnectedness and the interdependent reciprocal relationships that sustain life on Earth. Now, the easiest and most obvious reciprocal relationship is that we exhale carbon dioxide, plants inhale carbon dioxide, and they exhale oxygen. That's clearly reciprocal and essential. If plants didn't exist, none of the animals that breathe the oxygen would exist. So the next point there that on the slide is that the Earth service system concept provides a unifying framework for understanding service at the planetary and macro level. And it bridges ecological, social, and economic systems to promote the flourishing of life on Earth. So to put that in a graphic, I've got those three here in this Earth service system graphic, starting with ecological systems, coming around to the social and economic. Basically the point is that life evolved to serve life on Earth. So I'm listing off some key things on the right side. The ecological systems evolved from the earliest life, things like bacteria, and then the systems evolved from there. That ecology allowed our social systems, like our species had created, to evolve from the ecological system. We are completely dependent upon the ecological systems, although we don't seem to realize that very well based upon the global climate crisis we have. The economic systems evolved from the social systems, because clearly economics is part of the social system, but it's not all of it. And the biology evolves towards mutualism. There's a point you might not have had a reason to discover, as I've dug in further into the biology literature, specifically about evolution. The mutualism factor relates to things like my example with the oxygen being exhaled by the plants, and we exhale carbon dioxide. That is a mutualism relationship. Mutualism is a fascinating concept across the biological field. The reason it's more commonly the evolutionary flow is because it's self-sustaining in ways that parasitic behavior is not self-sustaining. It only sustains some, but not all. And the last point here is that modern human economic systems are evolving too slowly. And there's plenty of examples of the economic systems causing problems that need attention. Second point here in my talk on Earth service systems is the idea of elevating our language, of changing our language to improve it. I'm not saying to throw away words automatically or any of that. I'm just going to advocate for some elevation. And here's a great quote that is one of my favorite books that I read not long ago. Jeremy Lent, who is not a service researcher in any way, even though much of his book was about services, he just didn't know it. So the title of the book is The Web of Meaning. The subtitle is integrating science and traditional wisdom to find our place in the universe. Here's the quote, obviously, that I've got on the screen. In a complex system, the ways in which things connect are frequently more important than the things themselves. Now that's pretty close to the way a service researcher might have talked about things in terms of the interactions. He actually describes in one part of his book that there are two kinds of systems, cognitive systems and tangible systems. And I wish to hell I had had that idea way back in the early days of the service research field when we were talking about intangible all the time. Because intangible was the wrong frame. Cognitive systems, his frame, would have been really great if we'd had it in the 1980s. Because we took us until this century to throw away the intangibility, hip stuff. Cognitive systems fits it perfectly. Enough of that, but that is an inspiration here. So I'm proposing some new words for you. Language is the essential tool for connecting humans because we are a social species. That's why we invented the systems of language. In a recent 2020 article that introduced CervCollab, our Elevating the Human Experience article, we put this sentence in it. CervCollab encourages projects that seek to create service language that researchers in human populations can use to understand and improve human well-being for all. So I've got two new words for you. I'll put them up here on this slide so that you'll wonder what the heck he's going to say about them, and then I'll show you. So the first is services, and the second is conceives. So here's services. Service researchers lack a professional title for who we are. And as I say here on the slide, the disciplines such as physics, economics, biology, sociology, they all have corresponding professional titles, physicists, economists, etc. So I'm proposing the idea of services. And here's a definition of a services. A services is anyone who seeks to understand and practice serving humanity by elevating human service systems and human experience. Now, by saying that, that includes virtually anything that actually is interacting in service systems across the planetary concept I just gave you. So I'm encouraging you to embrace that as an identity and a calling. And the phrase that I've got right here at the bottom of it, the inspiration for this idea of services is a result of me explaining what CervCollab is to various other groups, nonprofit groups, networking groups of various kinds. There's a whole bunch of people looking at the problems of the world. We joined the Wellbeing Economy Alliance not long ago, CervCollab did. And explaining what we are to them, one of the ways I found myself explaining it is I said physicists seek to understand matter and energy, and I said service researchers seek to understand and improve what matters to people. And I actually got a very positive response out of that. But I think it would be more fun if it was easy to say to them services and they actually knew what services are. They know what those other groups are. But we've gone decades calling ourselves just service researchers. And of course, still not enough people know what service is. Here's a great quote from a book from 1998, E.O. Wilson. The book is Conceives, and the quote is, "We are drowning in information while starving for wisdom." And certainly at the point of 1998 when he wrote that, we have more information, massively more information than the drowning he's talking about. But we're still, of course, very much in the starvation stage too. So that's the reason for this word. His book was about conceives. We need a word, I think, for the unification and growth of wisdom. And so conceives is describing the unification of knowledge. So what I'm trying to put together is a word for the unification of wisdom. So E.O. Wilson in his book Conceives says early on in the book, like it's page 2, the first step to wisdom, as the Chinese say, is getting things by their right names. And his entire Conceives book is about how science has sought to unify knowledge. I think our service field should be working on unifying the wisdom of what humans should do. Because we're so much based on interactions, but we don't really interact as wisely as we should. We don't interact wisely with the ecology of the planet. We don't interact wisely with the social systems of the planet or with each other in economic systems. So the conceives definition I've got for you is the synthesis of diverse forms of human wisdom, including ethical, philosophical, spiritual, cultural, practical, and experiential. I was trying to include everything I could possibly think of that is associated with wisdom in various ways to collectively serve humanity. And again, it's that unification idea. So obviously you can't say, well, it's only this kind of wisdom, or you're not doing it right, is my view of it. So it's derived by blending two parts of the Latin language, much like concilience rather, to the con and then the sapientia. So services should seek to build conceivings. And that one to me is more obvious even than the services idea, just because it's a very similar construction. I'm going to elaborate more on wisdom with this third point. That was just the build-up to why I think we need it. Okay, recent article I did, a circular article in 2024. I'm one of the co-authors in this project. You can see the reference on the bottom right of the slide. There were three things we talked about in the context of service systems. That many service systems are not serving humanity well, and I'm tagging that with the word ignorance. We didn't tag it that way in the article, but I'm adapting this from the article. The center of this diagram has knowledge at the center, and that humanity has always lived in service systems. It took us in the service research field into this century to have those things in the written service research. Now, of course, you could go back a long, long time in the knowledge of the human species about how many times people are mistreated, whether it be things like slavery. We could make a long, long list of abuse of other humans. It's a tragic history. And that, I would call those misbehaviors are various forms of ignorance. So we know we're living in service systems, but we're still stuck with a lot of ignorance. That gets me to the wisdom point. We should design service systems that serve humanity wisely. And that's the point we were after in that article. So the rest of that article that I don't have any ability to talk about today talks about how service systems can improve their communications to behave in wiser ways. But I'm going to keep building on this idea of wisdom with these next slides, this one and the next one. So the present role of scholars in the social evolution of human experience. The present role, I think, is that we as knowledge workers in universities, our task in the way universities see themselves is to reduce ignorance. In fact, before I retired, I would often head out the door of my class saying to the staff at the front, I'm out to cure some ignorance today. Because to me, that was part of my job, was to cure ignorance, to reduce it. But I'm convinced, and there's a great book by Nicholas Maxwell. He published the first edition of it. Nicholas Maxwell is a philosopher of science. He passed away in January this year. His entire life was devoted to arguing that universities were doing it wrong. It should be about wisdom, not knowledge. I discovered him 2 years ago, shortly before he even passed away. I wish I had found his book in '84. It might have changed my life. I might have been wiser myself if I had found his book in '84. So here's the next one then. I think, going along with what Maxwell argued in his work on why wisdom is so important, that we should keep the reducing ignorance role, because you can't get to wisdom if you skip knowledge. You have to go past the knowledge stage, but to enabling wisdom. And I think there's a great need for enabling the wisdom of how service systems work. That's why I was part of that previous article I mentioned. That, I think, should be the future role. 2 key tasks, sort of 1 step, 2 step to get there. So I think we could become Homo sapiens, because you've heard that term, but there is no evidence yet, no clear, solid, scientific evidence that we as a species are Homo sapiens, because that is, of course, the Latin word for wise man, Homo sapiens. We're not there. I don't think it's impossible, but we're not there. So to come to the first point there on the slide, to use the services word that I just introduced you to, services are not just observers of human behavior. And in some science, some knowledge areas, it's more of an observation. I don't think that's enough in the context of wisdom. I think wisdom concerns what should be done. That's the difference often between what's knowledge and what should be done. So we're also service designers, and we should synthesize human wisdom to design and enable the well-becoming of humanity and a life on planet Earth. That obviously is my consapience logic there. Homo sapiens should practice consapience. If we truly could become, and I think we can become, what we've labeled ourselves as. It was premature, by more than a century or 2. Okay, here's an idea that I won't elaborate much on, but it's from previous work we did in CoLab, Service Ecosystem Health. And you can see that we had a Goldilocks experiment, civilization, a thought experiment there. That article, I wish the idea of the Earth service system had come to me in my mind when I was working with Linda Alkire on this. You can see that the parts I've got in green, that fits very much what I've talked to you about today in terms of the Earth service system, in the context of things like support individual life, human society, biodiversity. That whole thing fits what I've presented to you today. quote I've got at the bottom says scholars can achieve the will and wisdom to design service systems that enable co-creating universal human well-being. That would be a Homo sapiens sort of logic. So I've also got 3 service wisdom principles for you as I'm starting to wrap up here. I think there are 3 human universals. I've been looking for things that apply across human service systems. I think across all the systems that the humans have created, there's an essence of serving each other, that's the way the system needs to work. And it's not in the context of automatically tied to money in any sense, because so much of our ancient systems were completely social. There was no money in much of their early human history. Later, approximately 5,000 years ago, is when money appears in the records apparently. Serving the truth is trying to figure out what's true, and that's where the ignorance problem keeps getting in our way, because if we degenerate in some new form of ignorance, then we get confused again. It took a long time for humans to realize that we were a planet revolving around the sun, and so many other things are examples of that same thing. But it matters if you know that you're a planet revolving around the sun. And the third one is serving the future. I think that's what all life does, not just humans, that we actually are doing these things because life wants a future. So that one to me is more than just human. So in conclusion, the macro perspective of the Earth Service System concept is urgently needed because humanity and the world service systems have not fully grasped the meaning of the overview effect. They simply have not realized it. And then on my second point, if we had done so in '68, would we have the climate crisis we have now? No, we wouldn't have it. And third, that humanity needs to develop the wisdom to stop exploiting each other and the natural resources of planet Earth. A significant portion of the problem across the service systems where we aren't being served well is that they are actually heavily exploitative as opposed to more mutual. And viewing life as a planetary service system challenges to re-examine how life forms provide service to one another. It's whether through direct interactions or indirect through larger ecological processes. And so my last point there on the slide is that services should focus on solving those Earth service system problems. I need to add an acknowledgement to wrap this up. Kosai Hamdan and Alison Joubert are going to join me on this project. Remember, I said I had written it by myself, but I don't like working with myself. So I like working with other people. So I asked both of them to consider working on this project with me, and I asked them for advice on the slides before I finally finished them, and that's what they would be doing. So if you want to get involved with Circle, I've presented 3 other presentations here at the conference. Here's some of the ways of getting involved. Here's the link to the QR code to our website. We're a nonprofit, not a university, so we take donations. The donations were part of the Circle Lab scholarship funding that we just had announced, the travel scholarship that we announced this year. We're going to do more funding for research as we go forward. Time for questions.